Hey, Lauren. Lauren,
I want to go to.
who's presenting 4.1 from staff? What's that? Mike has it? Okay. All right.
I like we said,
See, we're missing Mike. One more minute here. If Mike wasn't presenting 4.1, I could probably start.
I think you can start. We're gonna do the prayer or the pledge and everything.
Sounds good. Well, I'd like to welcome everyone out to Planning Commission for Harriman City. Thank you for attending. Excited to get started. We will begin with a Pledge of Allegiance by Lauren. She'll be leading us in that.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Lauren. Let's see, we have 6 quorum members tonight. So full quorum, well, nearly full, enough to make a vote. Are there any conflicts of interest for any members this evening? All right. Next, we'll have approval of minutes from last meeting.
I'll make a motion to approve item 3.4, approval of minutes for the April 16th, 2025 Planning Commission meeting.
I'll second it.
Thank you, Heather. Second by Adam. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Perfect. Now we move on to legislative items. These are recommendations which will go to the City Council. And this is up for a public hearing. In a public hearing, we'll have a presentation by staff member, presentation by applicant. Then we'll open for comment from the public. And then we will close the public hearing by vote, and then discussion by commission. Then we have a motion to approve or deny and list those reasons. We do have a public policy comment, or a public policy and procedure, and I'll read that so that we're all, everybody can understand that. The purpose of public comment policy is to allow citizens to address items on the agenda. Citizens requesting to address the commission will be asked to complete a written form, a comment form, and present it to the Deputy City Recorder. In general, the chair will allow an individual 3 minutes to address the commission. A spokesperson recognized as representing a group in attendance may be allowed up to 5 minutes. This policy applies to all public meetings. Mike Malloy will be presenting on item 4.1 from the staff.
Thank you, commissioners. And as we discussed this briefly in our work meeting just now, this is a citizen-initiated petition to amend portions of our zoning code, the text amendment relative to accessory structures within our city. As the commission well knows, this is an item that we labored over extensively, and then again with our city council. And the applicant understands that we have worked very hard to create the current ordinances before you. Also, again, although this is being brought forward by an individual resident in response to a particular concern, this type of amendment, as the commission knows, has a broad-reaching effect, right? This is not just going to affect one particular property or even zone within the city. It's an amendment of all of our existing accessory structure regulations moving forward. Now, having said that, let's see if we can get this to move forward here. There we go. We all appreciate the complexity of our zoning regulations. And especially as you're bouncing between the zoning code and also the building code, which has different standards, right? They're trying to achieve different things. Zoning is largely regulating use. In some instances, it's regulating appearance, aesthetics, also the scale, the height, and all of that is relative to different areas within the city, right? These different zones. But even though at times we're so comfortable as planning practitioners and even as planning commissioners, I think it is fair to say that to the average citizen, some of the weeds and details of zoning can get confusing. It can be difficult. So this was brought on by a particular issue that the applicant had experienced in obtaining a building permit for an accessory structure within the city. And during the course of construction, it came to our awareness that there were some non-compliant issues. The structure is not fully complete, but it is mostly constructed. I briefly highlighted this background in the staff report, but again, I've encouraged the commission to be thinking about this text amendment almost without regard to the specific incident that prompted this amendment, right? We're looking at this as a global issue, not just a specific incident. So we're trying to figure out how to help the homeowner, the applicant, to resolve this compliance concern. And obviously there's an opportunity to simply amend the structure, right? Remove portions of the building that are not compliant. It's obviously costly, expensive, painful, all those things that you might imagine if you're tearing down something that you built, or at least in part. But there was also this idea of, well, maybe we could kind of use this experience to see if we can't fine tune or make the ordinance a little better, try to build on the mistakes. So we're considering this like a friendly amendment. The objective is not really to change the spirit, the large objectives of the city code. You know, we have Casper the Friendly Ghost, right? Because we think ghosts are scary. Diving back into this accessory structure ordinance is scary, but this is really kind of a friendly, not large amendments, but kind of a refining that. And in discussing this amendment with the applicant, the staff recognized that we have had some issues. You know, we talked about this in the work meeting. Maybe not everyone has this issue, but in general, it's easy to understand that there is some complexity. We have lots of little details in this code, lots of options. We have special exceptions. We have increased setbacks based on height. There's just some level of complexity there. And it is, I think, for the average citizen or resident, it can get difficult to understand. And then we've also talked about how we have been receiving complaints of accessory structures being too big in our community. And then upon inspection, we're finding that they are actually compliant because our ordinance is allowing for some fairly generous structures in our city based on the type of structure that is being requested and also the size of the property. So we are dealing with this issue post the approval of our current code. So thinking about that and thinking about the applicant's situation, there's a number of different amendments that are included in this proposal for your consideration. One is just the general intent of just saying, let's try to clarify the language, not changing really the overall intent. We're looking at just non-substantive amendments, you know, to grammar, punctuation, code references, making sure that any amendment we do here is going to not mess up what we just did in the recodification of the city code. There is a proposal, and this was actually something that I had suggested as kind of adding on to what the applicant is looking for, looking at the potential of having increasing those small accessory structures that are 200 square feet or less. And this is kind of prompted from a future conversation that we anticipate having with detached ADUs, which we currently don't allow, but it is something that we do need to talk about. The idea is if you have that small footprint detached structure, but you have a second story like loft We want to clarify that that would require a building permit. Right now, our zoning code just says, hey, if you're less than 200 square feet, you don't need a building permit. But technically, by building code, if you have that second-story habitable space, you do need to have a building permit. And then, obviously, that we're talking about on those smaller structures, then also increasing that height from 16 feet to 20 feet to potentially have that loft space. Another proposal is to have a consistent maximum building height based on the lot size and not have it connected to the size of the structure that is being proposed for development. So 16 feet would be the maximum height on a, and I apologize, that's a typo on my part. That should be 20 feet on something that is 10,000 square feet or smaller. And then 20 feet tall on 10,001 square feet up to basically a half acre. And then anything 25 feet would be the maximum on half acre or bigger. And then dealing with a potential consistency in the minimum rear yard and side yard setbacks, a minimum of 3 feet. You can certainly have more. Right now, the code is saying that as you get a taller structure, you have an additional foot in setback requirement. What ends up happening in doing that is you start eating up your yard space for something that's really not usable necessarily. So the idea is we want to improve land use efficiency by reducing that minimum yard space. Obviously, we're talking about bringing down the potential maximum height of these structures, and then making sure we have sufficient access for maintenance. And then that 3 feet also allows for, like, if you have your drip line off of your roof, we'll still capture that on your property. You're not going to be too close, so we can still do proper drainage controls. This still maintains the additional front yard setback behind the minimum yard requirement. But we also had another standard in the existing code where it's saying that wherever the front facade of the existing building is, this would require an additional 5 feet behind the existing building facade. In talking with our staff, who review building permits, that has seemed to be somewhat problematic. I think it's a good intention. It's in the current code, but there was a suggestion that maybe we simplify that and just go back to just saying whatever that front yard minimum requirement is, the accessory structure would simply be 5 feet behind that line. And then another one, and this is something I've actually been interested in doing for a long time. There are some recommendations just kind of in the industry, just best practices, this idea that, you know, if you're marginally off in some of these dimensional qualities, you know, if it's 20 feet or 20 and a half feet, really what is the difference to the average person just standing on the sidewalk looking at a structure? We currently do have a 10% deviation for setbacks, but we don't include that for heights. And there's certain qualifiers. It has to meet certain standards in doing that. And that deviation is reviewed by city staff and approved by the community development director. So that's basically the points of the proposal. We included a copy of the proposed amendment from the applicant in your packet. Obviously, he's here tonight to be able to answer your questions. I've instructed him that he's able to address you before and after the hearing, which I know, Commissioner Ferguson, you read that as part of our procedure. Any questions for me at this time as you're considering this? Okay. And we outlined in the packet, of course, you know that you have the opportunity to approve and forward a recommendation to approve to the City Council. You can recommend approval with modification. You can recommend a denial. That recommendation would still move forward to the City Council for consideration. You can also, if you decide that you would like to recommend some further modifications to the draft, you can table it, give the staff some, or give the applicant some direction as to what other options you would like to see considered. So you know the drill. You've been through this before, so all those are before you tonight.
So maybe just as a quick, from my point of view, not necessarily a question, but maybe a comment to confirm. It appears that with these recommendations, it would make it more prescriptive and less form-based. That probably.
Yeah, we're simplifying the tool. Yeah.
Okay. So in some ways, it may be a little more restrictive, but,
Still maintaining a lot of the other things that was achieved in the draft, though. It's just basically bringing down some of those heights and standardizing it, standardizing the maximum.
okay.
Yeah.
Any other comments? All right, well, thank you, Mike. We'd like to ask the applicant to come forward. If you could please address the commission and give us your name so that we can get that recorded.
My name is Kyle, C-Y-L-E, Jones, J-O-N-E-S. I appreciate you guys meeting tonight to discuss this. Kind of helps use the yard, make the yard more usable with these other setbacks. We have city-owned property behind us. It's just a drainage. There's currently nothing on being able to have a different setback because of that. I understand there's setbacks for the other reasons. I don't remember exactly where in the code it is, but I think I've been told that there's, if you have two sides of your property with city, that's city-owned on two sides, then there is a different standard for setbacks because of that, but there's nothing for the people that are in the middle. One thing, I don't know. Anyways, yes, I appreciate you guys.
Okay. Thank you. Let's start with, do we have any questions for Kyle from commissioners?
I don't.
Thank you very much. We now have an opportunity for a comment from the public. So we'll open this up for a public hearing. Is there anyone online? Okay. Well, seeing no comment from public, I'll open it up for a motion.
I'll make a motion to close the public hearing.
Motion by Heather,
Second.
second by Adam. All in favor of closing the public comment?
Aye.
Okay. Well, let's start with commission comment and discussion.
This is kind of difficult for me. I'm trying to balance our rights to private ownership and doing what we want on our property to adversely affecting maybe an adjoiner that is saying, doggone, he's done this, but I couldn't do that. So I'm really wary about changing too much in the code, although I can understand having some leniency in there. It's just the provision of what kind of leniency that I'm getting hung up on, you know, because whatever we do, we're going to set a precedent, not just for this gentleman, but for all of Harriman that says, well, you know, here's the 10% height thing. I think it's hard to visually perceive 10% for the adjoiners. For us that are in the industry, maybe we can spot it, but so I wouldn't be too willing to change the amendments that much, although I understand that I don't want to, it already feels like we're being hindered in doing what we want to do with our own property more and more. So I really want to back off of that.
Thank you, Darrell.
I'm interested in hearing from the other council, or from the other commission members, which of these, if any, that they do have more concern with of the proposed amendment.
I don't love the increasing the maximum building height from 16 to 20.
I know, I was thinking of that too, but then I was comparing it to my 9-year-old daughter and height, and it's not
I know, it's like 4
significant.
feet, but
Right.
20 feet seems really high to me.
I think
20 feet on a half-acre size lot.
Yeah.
And it's only if there's a second story, is I think what Mike put in here. I can see that maybe we do need to tie it. I could see the consistent maximum height for square footage of lot would make sense. And I can see why we would maybe want to have a second level that you can actually use instead of just storage. Kinda like the picture showing here.
More possible.
I didn't show these because, again, this is kind of more planting a seed for our further discussions with ADUs. But these are small footprint, ADUs essentially, and this is 20 feet tall, and I'm going like, that's pretty charming. I mean, that seems like, why wouldn't you want to potentially allow something like this in our community? But again, that's kind of seeds for a further conversation. But that's just to give you how would that look? What would be the vision of something like that?
Michael, will you remind me, do they have to have the accessory units, or do they have to still match what the primary building looks like?
It depends if we have that visibility, yeah.
So,
Go ahead.
in terms of architecture, just the front of the home needs to match the material, or the front of the accessory structure needs to match the material of the home. There's some other provided materials that they could use as well, like I think cedar shake, or you could do a cement board or something like that. That doesn't necessarily, match the existing home if they wanted to have that option. But the other three sides are not required to match.
Right.
Unless it's
And then we still maintain exceptions for agrarian purposes, right? Agricultural uses, so.
Now, Michael, if you could stay there,
Yeah.
With regards to some of those images, so I guess one of the things I'm having a hard time with a little bit is the max height issue. It looks so different depending on the structure. Because, for example, that pitch, the pitch angle of the roof, for example, it might only be 15 feet tall near that barrier, near that lot line, right? But then as you get to the top of the pitch, then that's where you get to your 20 feet. But the top of the pitch is 10, 15 feet from the property line sometimes, right? So I have a hard time, I just don't know that you can really be codified, obviously, but the concept being, where's that measurement of the 20 feet being taken?
So it's always to the peak.
Right.
So it's peak from the grade essentially to the peak.
Right, so
That's what we
essentially a
fixed.
flat roof building
Yeah.
that's 20 feet,
It
a 20
can
foot
be,
wall
it can be, that's true. It
is
can
going
be,
to
it doesn't
look-
have to be
look and
pitched like
feel
this.
very different
Yeah.
than what, for example, those images were shown.
We also see a lot of shed, so single sloped roofs.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
Single slope is up at 20 feet at the front. It's going to be 20 feet from the property line as well. So you don't have that incremental.
yeah.
Because it used to be like averaging the height, and it was a nightmare to try and see what that was.
Yeah.
That's
Right.
why we got rid of it. I
So-
mean, the fact that we're at least tying to the peak is at least better than what it used to be.
Yeah.
'Cause
And I apologize, so for clarification, if it's a 200 square foot small accessory building, I apologize, it still is 16 feet if you're under 10,000 square feet. It's that range of lots that's between 10,000 to a half acre that we said previously, 16 feet maximum. So on that bigger lot, I was thinking like, well, why not allow a 20-foot tall structure, but it still is a small footprint. We do allow that 20-foot structure already for medium, if it's a medium structure on that half-acre lot. And then previously, the code says if it's a large structure, you could go up to 25 feet. So again, this is that idea of like, maybe we were just a little bit too tall. Again, I'm just based on feedback, right? I'm getting phone calls, we're getting called out to go look at properties, we're getting complaints. So I thought, okay, here's the idea of let's just standardize 20 feet tall maximum, but on these quarter to half acre lots, right? You're still maintaining 16 feet if you're less than 10,000. So I think having a flat roof structure, but it's on a bigger lot, there's a little more room there, and so the impact isn't as is large, and, we already were doing that on that size lot. It's just that the little structures weren't allowed to go that tall. And I tend to prefer, or if we're gonna talk ADUs, I tend to prefer the smaller structures than the larger ones personally or professionally, so.
So when we created this, we were only talking about shed style. And I think we've evolved to now we're thinking of sheds, ADUs, different things.
That's what's coming, right?
And I personally would rather do it all at once, kind of rip the Band-Aid off and do it the right way, rather than just react right now. So I lean on more coming up with a solution that makes sense for, because I could see some areas where we may need to adjust what you're proposing, but I honestly, thinking about ADUs, I'm not thinking about those today. I'm thinking about toy barns, not ADUs. But I think we need to think about them together before we do this, any more changes, personally, because I think it opens up options. Like that architecture you were showing, totally makes sense. But a sloped single shed, a shed roof, maybe not. Like it. But I'm
again,
also a big fan of we need to remove more.
You can already do a shed roof in our zoning tool. It's just that it's not the small 200 square foot or less structure, right? Because you just don't get enough height in that structure to be able to do occupiable space over the garage.
Yep.
So, but you're right, we could consider that later. I just thought while we were into this particular section of the code, maybe we would address that right now, but
No, I think it's
fine if you're not comfortable with that right now.
I actually like some of the proposals you're changing, and it's almost making me think maybe we need to open it up more, is what I'm kind of thinking lately. And I know that's not what, it was painful before, but I'm more of I think we tried to solve every scenario, and I think we may need to just let stuff just happen. Like, let good things happen, let people take care of their ownership. And that's kind of what I'm thinking.
That's a good point, is as we were initially fighting through this, we really wanted to apply to as many scenarios as possible. And part of that was the letting people do what they would like to do on their own property.
Correct.
So that was part of it. But then at the same time, not infringe on somebody else.
Correct.
So, a 20-foot, 25-foot wall right on your neighbor's property line is not exactly, ideal. So that's why we had the adjustable setback, was you can go bigger, you just push it further away. So that was the reason behind it, was we could get, allow people to do more. It's just, if you're gonna go that big, maybe you're just not quite as close to your neighbor when you do it.
But we have, I agree with that, but we have neighborhoods that we approve 3-foot side setbacks for the entire house that go really, really high.
Yeah.
So
But that's the house, yeah.
But what I'm saying is, it's still the feel, it's still the shadow, however you want to say it. You're just accepting it of the house. I'm leaning on, sometimes maybe we need to have more accessory units to let people do what they want to with their property.
I agree with what you're saying, Adam, except I wonder, so then I guess, where's your reluctance on these items? Because we could always readdress these same items if we came back to it. In other words, if you're wanting to relook at the whole thing, I agree, I like that idea. So then what issues would you take with these specific items for just today?
The ones that I still think, and this is where you get into it, it is a difference between I bought my little teeny shed that is a Costco style shed that's plastic, and I can just throw it up or take it down wherever I want. I am a firmer believer that 3 foot's too far. I'm okay with it being really close to your neighbor's fence, because
Costco shed.
the Costco shed.
Yeah,
Yeah, if it's movable.
exactly.
Or even if it's not movable, but it's more movable, is what I'll say.
And it's
a
generally short. It's not-
Yeah, they're not tall, but what I'm saying is that this is saying 3 feet. So that's what I'm trying to say is,
So you
we're almost
wanna
changing
open
so
it up
much
even
that,
more on
Yeah.
that part.
yes. Well, I think right now you're allowed to do 1 foot as long as it's under 200 square feet, period.
Yeah, yeah, and that, if you notice in your table, and this is kind of a generalization, right? It doesn't really have every detail, but If it's, if your accessory structure is equal to or less than 8 feet, yeah, you can have a side yard that's adjacent to a street that's 1 foot. In the rear yard, you can have it be 1 foot. So, yeah, those 1 foot setbacks are still there for those little under 200 square feet, 8 feet or smaller, you still have that. So this was more like in the body of the table when we're talking about, again, removing that idea of increasing, for the taller buildings, increasing the setbacks by 1 additional foot. This is saying, maybe we bring down that tallest building that's 25 or 30 feet, let's bring that down a little bit and then just standardize the side and rear yard setback. At least in this proposal. Again, you can do with it what you want. If you want to think about it more or make further modifications, or we're hitting you cold with this, we know that. A lot of times we workshop these with you, but we were anxious to get this in front of you because we just finished that recodification last time we met. So, and we knew this would be a challenge given the past history on working on this code.
Well, one of the great things that I think 25 foot on a half-acre lot, it's not as big a deal, especially if you're, 10 feet off the property line.
Right.
Or 50, whatever what equates to. So I'm not necessarily against it, because if it's sitting off the property line, you're not, casting shadows on your neighbor.
So are you thinking almost kind of like what Mike's proposing here, where we make a table by the lot size and maybe a setback by the lot size?
Oh, that might be an interesting thought. One other piece I was also thinking of that could play into this, almost what you'd brought up, is the idea of maybe there's some additional things if you do a pitched roof of a certain.
Distance of the height versus the max height.
Yeah, well, maybe the setback can be allowed to be different if you have a pitched roof of 612 or more.
Right.
Or, if you have more than 612, maybe you can do a setback that's a little less.
Yeah, I think this might be, I don't necessarily disagree with, I think, really anything on this list. That's where I'm coming from. But at the same time, I do think there can be a little bit more crafting to it. So then I just don't see what's wrong with maybe being okay with this, but then definitely wanting to look at additional ADU concepts with this, the pitched roof concept, and a little more refinement on that front.
I'm more of a fan of, I'd just rather address it once and be done. That's just more my frame of thought is we've been talking about the idea of doing ADUs for a while. Mm-hmm. I'd rather just embrace it, continue this, just embrace it and tackle it while we're doing it, because they are coming. And they will be submitted the day whatever we change.
Our state legislature is going to get there, I'm sure.
Correct. And that's where I think the accessories themselves would be a good point to talk about. I mean, any of us that have children that are looking for apartments right now are starting to think about ADUs. Like it's a reality because of just the sheer cost of rent and things like that. So I'm just saying, for me, again, I'm just one vote, I would prefer to continue add on the ADU thoughts, because when I was coming in, I haven't completely solved the ADU issue in my head yet on what I could recommend for some of this stuff.
And I can appreciate that. I mean, if you feel like you want to have maybe more conversation on that, but recognize the ADU ordinance would be driven by the city. This one has been filed by a resident of the city, right? And so to burden this application with that might be unfair to the applicant.
And the applicant proposed every one of these changes?
No, yes, I worked with the applicant on drafting this. They submitted this proposal, but not every element is necessary to cure their deficiency. We were just in conversation like, what would it take for the city to possibly be interested in kind of reopening this issue? What were some of those broader public concerns that maybe we have been observing that might be of interest to the commission and the council to look at right now? We could certainly simplify this further to be specific, but to address the applicant's current interests, but that seems really myopic, right? We're trying to have a conversation that is broader in conversation because it's going to have a broader impact.
So Mike, this is, this reads and everything we've been talking about is addressing a vertical axis. What if the creep is in a horizontal manner by even a small amount?
So this last one again, this is adding a 10% height deviation. We already have a setback deviation, 10% setback deviation option. Yeah, so that's already in the code right now.
Yeah, and didn't we do something on our subdivision codes to coordinate the PUEs so
Yes,
that they don't outline the lots?
we no longer require PUEs around side and rear property lines unless they're necessary
So that
for
would be,
utilities.
yeah, that would be conducive then with
Yeah.
a smaller setback.
Yeah.
Otherwise, if someone applies this to an older or an existing subdivision, there's some hoops they gotta go through to clear those.
Right. We don't have to remove the easements, but we do need to get the utility companies to sign a waiver, an easement waiver or release. And we do require that form to be signed whenever that easement is present and as in conflict with a proposed construction project.
I think I agree with Mike on this, on the concept of, I think if we want to open up the ADU thing, that's fine. To saddle this with that, I almost think is a disservice to the applicant. I agree with that. I think it's the fact that we are going to be considering all those ADU things does play into a part of whether or not we would want to consider this. But it's almost like, well, why should we paint the room if we're gonna do a full remodel? We're not, and so then you just keep putting everything off, and that's where bureaucracy really does get in the way, and I don't like that. I really don't. I don't like the idea of government getting in the way of something just because it's like, well, we're thinking of changing this in the future anyway, so let's not change anything. If these make sense, I think we move forward with them. If they don't, then we don't.
Which is why I actually think it would be better in this case to do a myopic look to support the issue of the applicant's interests now, rather than change a bunch of it.
So just shrink down
Just shrink down what are we
specifically?
really talking about? Normally, I wouldn't want to do that, but I agree, I don't want to be more bureaucratic.
Right.
But to me, we're adding a bunch of stuff that I don't know that we know
What specifically
is an issue yet.
is the issue within these?
Well, as again, I've mentioned the complaints we've been getting on structures that are actually permissible but are too tall.
Yeah.
And this structure's 80% done, it's already framed. it's already
20
been
and a
framed.
half feet tall is what this one is,
Yeah.
which would need this 10% height deviation. And also the 3-foot rear yard setback. It still has a 5-foot side yard setback right now, but it would require, typically, we would require an additional increase, additional feet above, the standard 16 or whatever it is, so.
And it has a.
Yeah, we're just, in standardizing the setbacks, that's what is helping the applicant in this particular case.
So
Does it have a pitched roof?
Shallow. Yeah, you can ask the applicant details on that.
So for me, if we were to talk about that, those two, I could see that. The 10% deviation, I could see that making sense today.
Yeah.
The 3-foot minimum side yard and setbacks, I'm a firm believer, I think accessory dwelling units should be closer to the property line. I know that we as neighbors don't like when we can't control what we don't own, but we don't own it. So,
I'm okay with the 3-foot when it's shorter, because I don't want the shadows, it might ruin my garden. I don't know, if it's right next to me and it's 25 foot tall, that's gonna change what I plant.
I agree with I totally understand, but I'm more of I'm more of a, they could still block your sun growth for your garden. So, I personally think we should let people do what they want, and so I like the idea of 3 feet, and I actually would, if I could, I would push it as close to the property line, because I actually personally like that I'm talking to a shed and not hearing a dog next to me. So I guess all personal opinion at this
3 foot
point.
makes a bad dog run, but 6 foot makes a great dog run.
Correct, and that's why I think less is better, because I'd rather have the dog run on the other side of the shed. But, so I don't have to hear it, they can. If that was the case, then I actually am okay with those two. I do think we should pause on the second loft, the second story, and increasing heights until we think about the ADUs, is all I'm trying to say.
And again, that only affects the small footprint, because we're already allowing those taller
Correct.
buildings. It was just like a smaller building, if somebody wanted to have that loft space over a smaller building, we wouldn't allow it under the 16-foot maximum.
And that's where I just,
That's where that more is an ADU thing.
to me, I think it's just more thinking about the ADU-ish, kind of.
Yeah.
And so that's where I would rather pause for that one. So the two that I would be comfortable would be the, what is that, the fifth bullet?
fifth and the last.
The seventh bullet.
Yeah, 5th and 7th.
Well, and if you can't tell, I'm a little hung up on pitched roof here.
I know, I can hear that.
And so I keep thinking, and this is almost an ADU thing, and height, if we, I don't know if there's maybe a way to allow, if we have a pitched roof, maybe there's a little bit more height here, so then it doesn't feel as tall when you're next to it. I don't know, maybe we allow, if the pitched roof matches the pitch of the main house, could we go a little taller?
I need to do some research on that, because the codes from the state, remember, they limit what we can design is for the single-family dwelling,
Yeah.
but it doesn't really say that for accessory structures.
which I
So
could
maybe we can do a little more design standards on an ADU. I don't know. Need to do some research on that.
And that's where I think sheds should match the roof. I completely agree with you.
Match the house.
Match the house, but I think that's a future discussion. And it gets into a lot more architecture
get
and a
into a
lot
lot more,
longer,
yeah.
which is either, to me, where we pause. This is my proposition. We either pause or we reduce this down to a logical release
5 and 7.
and then handle that as another issue, just because I worry if we keep adding too much. There's other things we have to think about and setbacks and stuff like that.
I will say, if you're saying that you want an ADU to have the same roof style or pitch as the main home, that will be very problematic. Because as our architect knows, I mean, the only way a lot of these smaller buildings work is if you do these shed roofs or other kind of roof designs that are not typical for a single-family home, or even a flat roof with a rooftop garden, those different things. You're gonna have a real problem that'll be a really limiting architectural requirement.
And that's why I don't think
Yeah.
we should be touching the architectural too much and just sticking with giving a little bit of flexibility of I measured
Then have
wrong.
further discussion on
And then have further discussion and bring that back. And maybe in the case of a true ADU in the future, maybe we reduce the setback because then you're farther away from your neighbor. I honestly don't know. I haven't thought about it.
Yeah,
I think we're on the same page, yeah.
So I think I
as
have
the
enough.
chair, I don't have a vote.
I'm ready to make a motion if everybody's comfortable, so.
Oh, wait a
Do
second.
you want, oh,
Just one clarifying thing. The root cause of this situation, I know we're looking at a broader picture, but was it just interpretation of the existing codes and confusion in that?
again, I would suggest you maybe ask the applicant on kind of what tripped him up on the compliance.
Could we have him come up and ask him that? So we get it, an error occurred, whether in interpreting the plans or interpreting the code. I presume you being a builder, you can read the plans, so that probably wasn't it. To me, it had to be the codes that you were dealing with, the standards. Were they confusing to you, or how was this error introduced?
Yeah, so hopefully I've calmed down a little bit. Sorry, I was got nervous there and didn't know what to say. The reason why we're here, where we are now, is I had a miscommunication with a city employee on what I could build. Ordered the building, right? It's build time 6 weeks out, go through the whole process, or 4 weeks out. Go through the process with the city to obtain the permit. And it was denied the week before the building showed up. And I was like, well, I can't just put it on Facebook Marketplace and try to sell it. It's custom to me and what I'm allowed for my size. I would have rather went bigger and not so tall, but there's the whole, you know, based on your property size and your house size, what determines your building size can be. So I went taller, just to hopefully do a second loft for storage. So, and they come back and said we needed to have the 7-foot setbacks. I figured I can't do that. Like, it makes the building useless. It has 2 doors. If we do a 7-foot setback off the back of the property, it's too close to the house. I can't get a pickup truck or anything like that in the second door. So we put it where we put it. The 10% for the height deviation on paper, on everything, it's supposed to be 20 foot. One of the inspectors, Doug, showed up, looked at it, and he goes, that's not 20 foot. We took him up in a boom lift to the top and put a tape measure on it. It's 20'6". How it ended up at 20'6", I don't know. Like, it was supposed to be 20 foot. So now on my permit, it goes to 21 to make it whatever, acceptable on the permit. The roof pitch is 1 in 12. I went with a steel building back for the same purpose of hopefully being able to put a second level in. And I figured a flatter roof would allow me more storage. Sorry, there's a lot of other things I was going to say, but I can't remember them now.
No, no problem. My guess is the 6 inches, the slab, but
The 6 inches is from the slab,
yeah.
so and that's we measured. Yeah,
It depends on where they're measuring from, yeah.
yeah. This is a mix between me doing as much as I can and hiring other contractors to come in and do the concrete and stand the building and all that.
Okay.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you.
Well, where are we at? I can see all sides. I can see wanting to resolve this once and for all. I'm sure Clint wants to dig into it once or twice more. But I don't want to hold,
Maybe I'll just bring up one last item. If we did 5 and 7, a 3-foot setback with a 10% deviation, would that mean anywhere in town we could have a 16-foot tall wall right adjacent to neighbors,
3 feet away,
3 feet away from the fence? Yeah.
3 feet away.
with
I still think
with
we
a
should-
10-foot deviation.
I still think we should allow the 1 foot for the 200 square foot stuff, the little small little bitty sheds, but.
Costco, yeah.
But the 3-footers,
Yeah.
I'm okay with it. I personally, like I said, I would rather have the dog run on their side of the fence than my side of the fence. And I almost think almost everybody would. And that's what I think happens is it either becomes store another toy there or a dog run.
Yeah.
And so I'm more of a fan of, I would rather see a shed that's quiet than hear the dog and have to have it echoing in my yard. So that's just Adam's opinion. But so I'm ready to make a recommendation if everybody's good.
Just a question for clarity. Do we need to add the first 2? Or more points of clarification, it seems like?
Ensure consistency and clarify language.
That's going to happen nonetheless, right?
I just want to make sure that as this moves forward from you to the council, that if there were any other just minor corrections that were non-substantive, that you would feel comfortable that we made that.
I
And I
think,
haven't checked how this compared, this was started before we did the recodification, so I need to go back and double check it with that section of the code and make sure we're not causing a conflict.
for me, Mike, I think I would say I'm okay with the way it is, except for maybe just don't talk about height right now. Don't worry about it yet. Because I think that's a different discussion coming down the line with the ADUs. So, and then the additional 5-foot front setback, I remember when we did this, there was like the crazy lots and stuff like that. I think we just need to talk about that before we just say yes to that one. Those are the 2 that,
Let me ask you this question of Mike. If we leave out bullet point 4, but then accept 5 and 7, does that solve the issues?
So leave out bullet point 4.
The changes in height?
Yeah, because really, it's not the height as much as it is the setback. It's the height with The old ordinance, as he mentioned, because he's over, would need more feet in setback than what he currently has.
The ones that it's really gonna penalize is if I'm on a large lot, I can now I can put that shed close to my neighbor.
Yeah.
And I'm more of a, okay, yes, you can. But you're the architect, that's where I
No,
I don't see a problem with it personally.
Well, and for me, it's really about the infringement, are you casting shadows that, that's the age-old argument.
Yeah.
So one of the, when this accessory structure ordinance kind of got underway, one of the cases was because somebody built they built their plan, they came in with plans. Their plans were incorrect. They were too tall from the from the property line. And so it was based off a neighbor complaint. And anyway, and we get a lot of those. But there was one in particular that I kind of think pushed it towards like, okay, we need to, really look at this and get a better ordinance in place, so.
Again, this is your first time seeing this. If you're not comfortable with anything, we could certainly, let this sit. Let us maybe refine this a little bit further. We've heard a few kind of concerns and where you're supportive and maybe where you're not as supportive, but obviously you have all those options in front of you. I just want to make sure that you feel good about what you forward to the council.
As we're discussing this, I do think it's important. We're talking about the public's ability to understand this and the clarity of it. I do think it's important to point out if someone is getting to the point of constructing their building, it has gotten through the review process, which means that if things were wrong, they were sent corrections, and those corrections were fixed on the plans prior to stuff being built. So if there was confusion up front, that's totally possible, but by the time it gets to construction, the applicant must have understood it enough to be able to get to that point, if that makes sense. Like there is clarity somewhere in the process. It may not be up front, but yeah.
So let me come back around to my point. I pushed all those different things, trying to vet it, if you will, what happens, to the rest of the city. I personally am okay with taller next to 3 foot. I just know some people that aren't. So I'm personally okay with it.
Yeah.
That's why I think we let council decide and we make a recommendation to them and see. So I'm more the things I think we talk about today are obviously the clarify and be consistent. That to me is kind of that's an obvious, you're gonna do that every time we look at the ordinance. But the two that I think are what we recommend is apply a 3-foot minimum for anything over 200,000 square feet on the rear and side setbacks.
Over how much square feet?
Over 200 square feet.
Okay.
If it's over 200 square feet, it has to be 3 feet, because right now that's the little small shed stuff.
Perfect.
And then allow for a 10% height deviation because people measure wrong sometimes. Those are the two that I would say I'm okay moving forward, and I will make that as a recommendation to city council
I'm starting to hear
as my motion.
a coalition. Are we ready for a motion?
That is my motion.
And drop
So
number
that is your
4.
motion?
Just those two.
So we have a motion by Adam.
I'll second.
Have a second. But Preston, sorry. Preston. Second by Preston. Well, let's take that for a roll call vote then. Andrea?
Yes.
Daryl?
Yes.
Adam?
Yes.
Heather?
Yes.
Preston?
Yes.
Okay, so the recommendation passes to go to the city council on those 3 items as noted by Adam. All right, well, thank you very much. Cool. Hopefully that helps as discussion goes on with the council. So that is item 5.1 or 4.1. Item 5, are there any chair and commission comments as we wrap up? Nope, okay.
I'm excited to do the ADU, so let's do it.
I would say let's do it sooner than later. So, and that's probably a good comment. I would say ADU, if we can start looking at that one fairly quickly. Because I know, once the legislature starts, I wouldn't be surprised if it happens this year, or this coming winter. So we've only got a couple months to work on it. So, so that's my comments. Any other comments? All right, future meetings, next city council, May 28th, 2025. Next planning commission, June 4th, 2025. Motion to adjourn?
Motion.
All right, all approved? Aye. Okay, thank you.